MassChallenge is the largest ever startup accelerator and the first to support high-impact, early-stage entrepreneurs without taking any equity. In 2014, MassChallenge, Boeing, and the ISS National Lab established a partnership that has led to numerous research experiments on the space station. We're very excited to have with us MassChallenge Technology and Innovation in Space awardees today to discuss their innovation stories and their perspectives on the value proposition of research in low Earth orbit. Moderating today's panel is Christine Kretz. Christine is the Vice President of Programs and Partnerships for the International Space Station ISS National Laboratory. Her role is to identify opportunities for leveraging the facilities of the ISS to enable science and technology research that will benefit life on Earth while maximizing taxpayer investment in the ISS. Prior to joining the ISS National Lab, Christine worked for IBM, starting in 1998 as a manager in the research division, where her responsibilities included IT security for 8 labs globally. From the research division, Christine took a corporate position and was named the Global Operations Manager for IBM Life Sciences, an emerging business area for IBM at that time. Christine has also held the positions of Healthcare Solutions Executive on the IBM Global Healthcare Industry team, as well as roles as a client executive and complex opportunity manager in healthcare life sciences. Most recently, she managed the Research Division Healthcare and Life Sciences Organization. Christine holds a BFA from Carnegie Mellon and an MBA in operations from Katz Graduate School of Business, University of Pittsburgh, where she is a director-at-large of the Alumni Board and a member of the Business School Alumni Board. Please welcome Christine to the stage.
Good morning. How is everybody? Good? You're very quiet. Let's try this again. How's everybody doing? That's awesome. I had an awesome morning, and I just want to thank all the women who showed up for the breakfast and the coffee this morning. Thank you. You started my day off really well today, and I'm really happy to have been with you this morning. Now I get to talk about something really exciting. It's part of my job, and I'm very new to the National Lab, but I was really lucky to be able to jump into this MassChallenge effort that we're doing in collaboration with our friends at Boeing, because it's really a great example of how we can partner and bring together some incredible ideas and leverage the LEO environment in ways that some of the people who you're going to hear from today hadn't thought of. So it's a very, very exciting thing, and I'm new to it, but the more I learn, the more excited I am. So we're going to have a team of people tell you about it. We are going to welcome questions, but you're going to use the app to put those in, and we'll have some questions, but I would like to introduce my panel. First, there's Kevin Foley. Kevin is Director of Global Sales and Marketing, Space and Launch Division of Boeing. Please welcome Kevin. Good song, Kevin. You got a good song. Maybe you have to dance up. I don't know. Next with us, Kate Brummie, Managing Director of MassChallenge. Kate. One of the recipients of these MassChallenge Awards, joining us is Dr. Paul Jaminet, co-founder and CEO of AngieX. Likewise, a winner of the award and a person who's doing the flight work with us, Nicole Wagner, is President and CEO of Lambda Vision Incorporated. Last but certainly not least, also flying with us is Brian Hess, founder and CEO of Launchpad Medical. Please welcome Brian. Thank you so much. Without further ado, we're going to have a few presentations. We're going to start with Kevin from Boeing.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. There we go, we're good to go. All across the country, entrepreneurs are founding and building new companies that use technology in innovative ways. The American startup ecosystem, the envy of the world, is spread outside the coast of high-profile tech hubs to other parts of the country. Startup activity is happening everywhere in cities and towns across the United States, cities like San Francisco, New York, and Boston. And while some years ago this might have been hard to envision, it's happening now on the International Space Station. It's this story that we're going to tell you about today. And the story isn't just a simple story, it has a little lead up to the story. And if you listen closely, you'll not only hear the story one might expect to hear at the ISS Research and Development Conference, where we talk about and celebrate scientific and technological achievement from people doing incredible work on the International Space Station. Well, you'll hear that. That's kind of at the end of the story, but there's a little lead up. The part of the story that's added here, the part of the story that I'm going to speak to, is that precedes that and leads up to the end of the story. And just like any other story, right, this one starts and begins with, like any other good story, once upon a time. Well,
uh-oh.
I don't know where to point this. That's the laser pointer.
There we go.
Well, actually, the story began in 2014 in a redeveloped building in the Boston Seaport District along the South Boston waterfront. It was here in this building at 21 Dry Dock where one of the world's leading early-stage startup accelerators has its offices, MassChallenge. It is here in this building that MassChallenge hosts annually over 125 startup companies and immerses them in their evidence-based tailored curriculum designed to help these companies excel in each stage of their early development. You'll hear more about this part of the story later in the program after I speak from Caitlin Brummie. She's the managing director there, and they're doing an incredible job. It was here in this building that the partnership was formed between Boeing and the International Space Station National Lab. It's this collaboration that would open the doors to the International Space Station to a new community, one previously unrepresented in the ISS user community, a community of self-start entrepreneurs and startup businesses. And here it is, into this building we walk each year with three simple things: a value proposition, a theory, and an opportunity. We invite interested companies to listen and learn about the International Space Station as we explain the value proposition and the benefits of performing research and technology development on the station. As for the theory is that our value proposition translates directly to the company's bottom line. Now, this is really where our value proposition and our theory gets pressure tested. Realize that we stand in front of a group of very smart and motivated people, finalists in the MassChallenge program, that are a very impressive group whose business plans and ambitions, while in early formulation, I'm sure never envisioned getting involved in space, much less the International Space Station as part of their business or their technology development plans. Nevertheless, that's the inspiring idea we were proposing. And we got a lot of looks like, are these guys serious? Are they for real? Well, it turned out, yeah, we're for real. With the backing and benefits that are the ISS National Lab and the Boeing brand, combined with the ISS value proposition, they became believers. Believers in themselves, believers in the possible. What might have seemed like a province for others became a realization of something that might be attainable. Well, in fact, we delivered the opportunity right to their door. And you know what? They saw what we had hoped they'd see, right? That is, using space, specifically the International Space Station, as a business incubator, similar to what MassChallenge offers as a business accelerator, a path forward that may lead to a competitive advantage in the marketplaces they compete in. And in most cases, those are here on Earth. They see this as a path forward, accelerating either time to market. They see it as a path forward to a better understanding of the underlying technology, and they see it as this may lead to an improvement in their product, and see it how it will differentiate them from their competition in the marketplace they work in. With the groundwork complete, companies then are invited to pursue the opportunity and validate their theory and develop proposals for flight projects designed for their business needs that will fly aboard the International Space Station. These proposals are evaluated and selected for our Technology and Space Award. Receiving this award represents an opportunity to fly and conduct their investigations on the International Space Station. To date, 14 companies have been selected and are on this journey with us. That is, in a nutshell, the Boeing National Lab MassChallenge Technology and Space Program. And so what you see up here on this chart, right, over the past 4 years, we've awarded a space and technology prize to 14 companies, and they're all listed here in the years that they were awarded. The prize has founded flight projects with focus areas ranging from cancer therapy, novel drug delivery systems, retinal implants, revolutionary materials to repair and and grow broken bones. We reward the highest impact startups through a competition for grant dollars in the form of equity-free cash awards. Direct seed funding from our partnership has been over $2.5 million, and added to that has been approximately $7 million worth of in-kind and other subsidized contributions, totaling around $10 million to date invested in this program. The grant money went to the startup companies for experiment design and to defray cost of ISS integration and operations, and the payments to the National Lab implementation partners. The chart shows the 14, so let me see if I get this right. You check my math, but 5 have already flown, and you hear from 3 of those guys today: Launchpad Medical, Lambda Vision, and AngieX. 3 other companies were launched just last week and are now on the space station waiting for their science ops to begin. Those companies are our very own mini PCR, Genes and Space team, Dover Life Sciences, and Microquin. 3 others are manifest later this year: CamMed Makers Health and Lux Labs, and 3 others are targeted next year to get their work started on board the International Space Station. And I'll tell you, we're on track this year, and we'll make the announcement for our 2019 Technology and Space Startup Selections at the MassChallenge Awards Ceremony this coming October. And if you happen to be in the Boston area, I'm sure Caitlin would extend you an invitation to attend their ceremony. With over 3,000 people in attendance, it's a celebration of innovation and an award ceremony like one you've probably never been to before. So, right, the technology and space funding leverages into much broader outcome measurements. Listed here are some of the results tied to the 14 companies in our portfolio: total addressable market, new revenue potential, average accelerated time to market, and solution of new pathways invented, and jobs. Every technology in space project selected has tested the theory that using the unique environments of space in some way or another has been informative to their business. Value assessments continue even after the flight projects and mission operations on space station are complete. You never know when the results of using the ISS as a business incubator will lead to an innovation breakthrough. You'll hear a little bit about some of that from the speakers on the panel. Boeing's role in seeding and supporting these projects shows benefit to ISS utilization by generating demand, and equally as important, a return on the investment to the nation, and directly to improving life here on Earth. In addition, as NASA embarks on the transition to be one of many customers in low Earth orbit, funding sources aside, they're somewhat interchangeable. We believe that we've demonstrated here what can serve as a novel commercial customer interface to the International Space Station and future commercial platforms in low Earth orbit. Well, with that, that's my part of the story. And what now you're going to hear is what I promised you earlier, the rest of the story. And Caitlin's here to talk about the MassChallenge model, and then we'll hear from some of the other companies in our portfolio. So thanks for your attention, and I'm going to hand this over to Caitlin at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. Which button is the next? Which is this one? Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today, and reiterate we are so grateful to be a part of this partnership. It's incredibly high impact for our startups as they move from idea to scale. So I'm here to just tell you a little bit about the MassChallenge model as context for what you'll then hear from the more interesting part today, which is from some of our past startups who have been a part of this program. Which one is this?
There we go.
Great. So MassChallenge is a global network of startup accelerators. We support the highest potential startups. We take no equity from startups. We provide our program and services for free. And we are focused on building innovation ecosystems around these startups that matter. Our mission is to do this to help solve massive problems. It's the mass in MassChallenge. So our mission is to make it as easy as possible for startups to launch and grow their ventures. We were founded in the start of the Great Recession with the idea that startups had a critical role to play in rebuilding our economy and helping lead us to a more creative and inspired world. We know that entrepreneurs think and find a problem, they take on these world's biggest problems, and they are the ones who often find the technologies and pathways that we need for social, environmental, health, economic progress. And yet, starting a business, while it may never have been as easy and less expensive, remains incredibly challenging. And there are resources that startups need to grow and scale. And so our model is to provide startups with these resources to move from their original idea and insight through early stages of business formation through to scale. And we think of several resources we surround our startups with. Funding is one piece of the puzzle. So we will give away over $1 million in equity-free cash prizes in just our Boston program this year. We also have programs now running in Rhode Island, Texas, Israel, Switzerland, and Mexico. The second piece of the puzzle for us is expertise. So we know that startups, many of them have exceptional founders at the center of their business, and yet we also know that they need that technical expert to help them think through new variations on their prototype. They may need expertise from a former entrepreneur to think about how you create and form a sales team. They may need access to experts to navigate the difficult pathway of raising funding. We have, in Boston alone, a cadre of over 400 mentors who have raised their hand to work with startups for free, one-on-one coaching, through office hours, through curriculum sessions. The third piece of the model is training. So we heard from Kevin an evidence-based curriculum. We seek to identify what those core elements are that startups need to understand and be exposed to in order to move and create their businesses. We provide these in curriculum sessions, through evening networking events. The idea is to ensure that we understand what startups need. This is from our own research and from listening to startups, and that we make this available. And the last is surrounding them with a network of partners that are mission aligned and relevant. We work with corporate partners, public officials, investors, former entrepreneurs to ensure that startups have a rich ecosystem around them. And this is what I was just referring to. Our approach, because we are non-equity, because we are a nonprofit, we can uniquely take an approach that's about creating ecosystems around startups that they need to grow and thrive, and to build the surrounding environment that elevates startups as a critical element of our local economies and our national economies. So we work closely with government to understand the economic priorities and the connections between those and startup activity, between universities and the angel VC community. Our goal is to activate a community that is focused on supporting startup growth and energy. And we're very proud. So now 10 years, we've just launched our 10-year impact report. We're in the middle of a midterm celebration of our pathways so far, remaining focused on the work that we have to do ahead. But we've supported over 2,000 startups since our founding 10 years ago across the globe. Our startups have gone on to create over 135,000 jobs in the US and abroad, have generated $2.7 billion in revenue, and gone on to raise $5 billion in funding. This is incredible economic impact. We are just a piece of the puzzle. Our goal is to catalyze this incredible impact that our startups have on the world. And we believe our results demonstrate that we are an important piece of the puzzle in the early startup formation. Hopefully you'll hear a little bit about the different ways that our work with startups helps them achieve those funding milestones, the hiring milestones. We work closely with academia to be studying our model, to identify what works, what doesn't work, and how we can create a transformative experience for our startups. And so this is just, three. We've seen the full list from Kevin. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul to tell you more about the work that they're doing.
Yeah, please go ahead with the video. We'll start with that, and then I'll show you my slide. Do we have the video? we're trying to make a therapy that can address 90% of cancers.
Third time's a charm.
In the US, over 1/3 of people go on to develop cancer in their lifetime. My mother died of cancer, and she died at age 33 when I was 10 years old. Wasn't able to do anything for her when she was alive, but I can at least have made my contribution to all the future mothers who might be in a similar situation.
Microgravity is providing a very good model for us to study how drugs are targeting normal blood vessels and to test our cancer therapy in this model.
Our approach destroys both the tumor cells and the tumor blood vessels simultaneously, and the whole tumor dies for lack of oxygen and nutrients. We notice astronauts have more cardiovascular disease but less cancer. And we noticed endothelial cells, which are the type of cells that make up blood vessels, didn't grow in space. So we're sending up a bunch of endothelial cells. We're going to treat them with our drug. And we want to see if endothelial cells in space are different than on the ground.
NGX's mission is to cure cancer, and microgravity may provide that opportunity.
Okay, so thank you. I'm Paul Jaminet of NGX, and I start my investor pitch with this scenario. Imagine you found a magic lamp with a genie inside who would grant you 3 wishes toward a perfect drug development company. And I tell investors 3 good wishes would be an ability to address large market diseases with high unmet need like cancer, cardiovascular disease, immunological inflammatory conditions, any kind of tissue repair or wound healing like recovery from heart attack or stroke, leading causes of blindness. And then a good second wish would be the ability to deliver drugs specifically to the key cells in those diseases and nowhere else in the body. And then a good third wish would be an ability to get access to the nucleus, the most important compartment of the cell, and to deposit into the nucleus any type of drug that you wanted, directly there where it would be most potent. And if you could do all of those things, then you could modulate expression of the genome however you liked, and it would only be a matter of time before you could find the perfect treatment for each of those diseases. So that would be a tremendous gift from a genie. And I try to persuade them NGX is the company that found the magic lamp. And so our scientific founders discovered some terrific biology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. This slide illustrates the wishes. So on the left, you see sections from the liver of a liver cancer patient who had a transplant. So you see on the left a slice through the tumor, and on the right a slice through the normal part of the liver. The red is where our antibodies go. So we reach the tumor cells and the tumor blood vessel cells. And then on the right, you see that we have access to the nucleus. So these are antibodies labeled with gold nanoparticles. And then we do electron microscopy to see exactly where they're going. They go in, they squeeze through nuclear pores and get to the nucleus. And there in the nucleus, we can drop off any drug payload that we want. And so the value here is, imagine any cancer therapy that you take by injection or by a pill, but instead of delivering it that way, you attach it to our antibody. It has no effect while it's bound to our antibody. Our antibody delivers it into the tumor, into the nucleus, so it's much more potent there, and it's very specific, and you get rid of all the negative side effects in any other cell type. So any cancer therapy gets improved tremendously. And what's the value of this? Well, getting into the nucleus adds a lot of efficacy. So what we found, every mouse tumor model that we've tested, we regress. And we can get permanent complete regressions where we eradicate every tumor cell, even in models like this one that are extremely difficult and non-responsive to most therapies. So this model is invasive, metastatic, and it's very aggressive. It grows 40-fold in 4 days, but we can kill every tumor cell. So Why did we want to go on to the International Space Station? Well, the big concern is that our dose-limiting toxicity is to normal blood vessels, especially arteries. And if people don't die of cancer, they're going to die of cardiovascular disease more often than not. And so we really don't want to add our toxic cell-killing payloads to your arteries. And it's difficult to study all the biology that we wanted to study on the ground because there's no good cell culture model for normal endothelium. And it's hard to study molecular mechanisms in living animals. So we discovered that endothelial cells cultured in microgravity have been reported to behave like the endothelial cells of normal blood vessels. So we thought, let's test whether endothelial cells cultured in microgravity can be a good test model for our drug and see how they respond to our drug. And so we sent cells up. And here you see that the cells weren't significantly affected by the launch. They still had a similar cell density. But then when we treated with our drug, just as we hoped, we found that when we treat with our drug on the ground, we kill nearly all the cells, but when we treated them in space, they were resistant to therapy, just like we expect that endothelial cells of normal blood vessels will be resistant to therapy. But as the experiment continued, we also found that the endothelial cells in space were changing, and they acquired a different morphology, some different behaviors. We brought them back to the ground. We continued to watch them through 10 passages of cell culture, and you can see that they maintained the differences in shape and behavior. So there seem to be epigenetic changes in cells in space. So the results of our experiments, microgravity, very interesting novel environment for biology. Cells do change their behavior there. The space station is a fascinating place to do science. And Boeing, MassChallenge, the ISS National Laboratory, great people to work with. So we had a terrific time. And I'd like to pass the baton to
Lambda Vision was founded to develop and manufacture a protein-based retinal implant to treat patients that are blinded by macular degeneration and retinitis pigmentosa. Both of those diseases, they don't have a cure, and while there are some treatments available, patients are going to go blind.
My grandfather actually suffered from age-related macular degeneration, and I personally saw the decline in the quality of life that came along with suffering from that disease, and it has made an impact and influenced my role in this company and the research that we're doing so that we can help the millions of patients that are suffering from this disease. The goal of Lambda Vision is to create this retinal prosthetic.
We're looking at now at manufacturing this on the International Space Station and looking at the effects of microgravity on the manufacturing process. We will have an implant that is more stable and more homogeneous than the implants that are currently manufactured on Earth. And our goal then is to get this into patients faster and sooner so that we can begin to really help some of those blind patients be able to see.
The opportunity to work with ISS National Lab and our implementation partner is really a dream come true.
For us, this has been an incredible opportunity to imagine now taking the science and the techniques that we've developed here and putting them on the space station is just incredible.
Great, thank you for that. So my name is Nicole Wagner. I'm the CEO of Lambda Vision. And what I'd like to ask everybody here is to imagine being at the height of your career and being forced to give it all up because you can no longer see a computer screen. Imagine having to ask your friends and family for a car ride because you've lost your license. Now imagine finding out that you're about to be a grandparent for the first time, only to know that you'll never be able to read your grandchild a book. Age-related macular degeneration and retinitis pigmentosa, they're both devastating diseases. These diseases affect millions of people worldwide. And so what Lambda Vision is trying to do is we're trying to restore vision to these patients through our retinal prosthetic. And so while there are some treatments that slow the progression of these diseases, ultimately people are going blind. So what you'll see up on your screen here is a normal person, what they're able to see. And then you'll see this current state-of-the-art technologies that are available right now. And so these technologies really only offer a low digitalized resolution. Now, because we're looking at molecular packing of a protein on a scaffold, we have the advantage of having far greater resolution than these competing technologies. And so what Lambda Vision's technology is we're a small, simple, flexible implant that can be placed in the back of the eye using procedures that are similar to a retinal detachment surgery, something that retinal surgeons are already familiar with. We're replacing the damaged rods and cones of the eye. So these are your light-sensing cells. These are the cells that allow you to take the light in this room and convert it into a signal that can be sent to the brain. And then, as I mentioned, we have far greater resolution than competing technologies because we're not limited by electrodes on a chip, but rather molecular packing of protein molecules on this scaffold. So you might be wondering, why microgravity and why am I up here today? So I was actually part of the 2016 cohort with MassChallenge, and it was sort of one of those things being in the right place at the right time. I had the opportunity at MassChallenge to sit down in front of some of at this time it was CASIS, ISS National Labs, and Boeing team to talk about some of the challenges that we were having as a company. And so one of the challenges that we really had was along manufacturing. So I knew that the way that we were manufacturing this was not optimal. We do this through a layer-by-layer deposition process, which on Earth is subject to the effects of gravity. So you can imagine if you're adding multiple layers of a protein on a scaffold, that's an additive effect that can eventually lead to a thin film that actually has not homogeneous layers and can actually be less stable over time. So we've had engineers look at this problem over and over and over again, and we've tried millions of different things. And it was really kind of, talking to Kevin and his team there, they said, what about microgravity? And so that's really how this project got started. So this is how we actually manufacture the retinal implant on Earth. And what we do is this layer-by-layer deposition process, where we actually take the scaffold and we dip it in a series of solutions. So as I mentioned, this is subject to the effects of gravity, where you get sedimentation of the solutions, which can lead to thin films that are not as homogeneous. And then you can get inefficient, irregular deposition of the protein, which can ultimately affect the performance of the overall scaffold and the implant when we use this in testes in animals. So in microgravity, we predict that we're going to get more improved homogeneity of the layers, increased stability and quality of the multi-layered system, and then this ultimately leads to a reduction in the number of materials that we would need to use. So, if we can do fewer layers, that's even better, less material. And that lowers the cost. And then it also accelerates the time, because every time that we have to add a layer to the scaffold, that's a time-sensitive process. So we were very fortunate through MassChallenge to be paired with an implementation partner. We worked with Space Tango on this project, which actually, I'd like to just take a minute and talk about that process, because for us, we had no idea how to get involved in space and would have never considered this as a project, because how does a non-space company get to space? And that's really where MassChallenge was a huge, in working with the ISS National Labs, it helped us to accelerate and that really realize this dream. And so what you'll see on your screen is actually a cube lab that's put into the Tango lab on the ISS. This middle image is what the box actually looked like. That was assembled by the Space Tango team. And then on the far image, you can actually see the protein flowing over our thin film, and that's actually taken on the ISS. We flew on SpaceX 16 in December. Our implant came back in early January, and we've been evaluating those thin films and hoping to now optimize some of the parameters from our first flight to do a subsequent flight to actually look at generating films that we can now use in animals for testing. So again, in microgravity, improved homogeneity of layers, increased stability, and then reduction of cost and materials. So the outcome of this, it's been really a fantastic partnership, both with the national labs, NASA, Space Tango. And besides this helping as a company, I think this is really great because it allows us an improved understanding of the effects of microgravity on layer-by-layer deposition, which has broader impacts to other companies. For us, what's key is having consistent manufacturing that we can use to insert these implants into humans eventually. Accelerated time to market, we want to get this into patients as fast as we can because there is a really critical need. And that's really our ultimate goal, to restore vision to these patients. So just to touch, this is sort of my last slide here, what I wanted to talk about is the broader impact. So this isn't, this is great for Lambda Vision, this is great for manufacturing these implants, but what we're building here is something that can actually be much larger. We have the ability to look at other implants that we can, or other technologies using this light activated protein that we use, bacteriorhodopsin, and that's for optical data storage, neural processing, pattern recognition, and then toxin detection, which is something that I spent a lot of my PhD work on. And then beyond this, layer by layer for drug discovery, biosensors, wound healing. And so I think, what I'm really here for is to thank, the ISS and National Labs for this opportunity, as well as Boeing, to be able to do this really exciting work and leverage the microgravity environment to help realize the potential of our technology. So thank you.
In your health tonight, a new treatment that could help people with broken bones and treat osteoporosis.
It's called bone glue. It's exactly what it sounds like. News Center 5's Rondella Richardson reports on the new injectable adhesive.
Need a dental implant, spinal fusion, or just have a broken bone? A Lowell startup invented this calcium amino acid mix. That's bone glue.
They've been placing the implant materials like screws and plates, and it's very invasive. So if there was a better way, like a bone glue, to solve these problems, it would be a major breakthrough.
We can inject the material, and it immediately stabilizes a dental implant.
The 3-year-old company Launchpad Medical is taking off, quite literally. The tetranite was tested on the SpaceX 13 mission. Astronauts lose 2% of bone mass in space. Even in low gravity, the strips of tetranite had cell regrowth, important for one-day treating bone loss in the elderly. Use of a hammer and screws on fragile bones, so damaging, those surgeries just aren't done.
To be able to mimic that on the space station and prove that this actually can have benefit in this population can be very exciting.
The glue, it actually feels like chewing gum or even a little bit like putty. Initially, rods and screws will be used along with the glue, but eventually the hope is to just use the glue. The glue hardens in 10 minutes when wet. This is a stress test, the pulling of the glued bones to show a patient who weighs about 200 pounds can be weight-bearing, walk, and start rehab exercises almost right away. There are regulatory and investment obstacles, but it's an idea that could stick. In Lowell, Rondella Richardson, WCVB, News Center 5.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be up here today. My name is Brian Hess, again with Launchpad Medical. I'm the founder and inventor of this bone glue technology that we just saw in the video. I really appreciate the opportunity for the experiment that we were able to run on the International Space Station. And so I want to talk about our company, our technology, and how that experiment is helping us accelerate our business to the market. So as you saw, we invented a bone adhesive biomaterial, and this is quite innovative because if you look at materials out on the market today, specifically to treat orthopedic injuries such as fractures, surgeons have to install complicated hardware and have to make quite invasive openings into the skin to place these materials. And these are called fixation devices like plates, screws, nails, etc. But to actually get the job done, those devices help hold the bone back together for structure, but what's also needed are bone grafting materials, and these are materials that help promote bone graft. So the combination of these two materials is really what is required to restore a patient back to normal function. Where tetranite comes in is actually a replacement. It's a 2-for-1. The actual glue replaces the need for the metal, and this is quite novel because it's an injectable material. So we can make less invasive incisions to apply the material. And as you saw in the video, it sets up very quickly in a wet field environment, a bloody field, and has very robust strength. So it could actually replace metal or at least augment metal, as she said, in many situations. But the material itself is a biomaterial. So like bone regenerative materials, this material over time will convert to bone, hence the 2-in-1 type product. And as you saw, the key functions, there's quite a bit of robust strength that develops right away to make it load-bearing. And that is obviously very critical. There's no such material on the market today that can do that in terms of an adhesive to replace the function of the metal. But then you also talked about the regenerative capacity. And in the slide on the right, you can see in an animal model, the material after implantation into bone regenerates. It's sort of resorbed over time, and new bone replaces it. But the key question we have, and I remember early on when we founded the company, is we knew a huge patient population are patients with osteoporosis. They're the ones that have exposure when they fall and they get broken bones. They're the most difficult patients to treat, and it's a huge patient population that's actually growing. And you can see the bone structure is so weak. So try to install a metal plate and screw in that, and often it fails itself. There's really no purchase or fixation strength to bone. So if we could use our biomaterial to essentially glue that together, that would be phenomenal. But the question is it strong enough? And where investors early on asked us, and they said, but how will it actually work in the resorption process? If these patients have compromised systems, will the bone actually regenerate? Will the material actually function over time? And so that got us really wondering, like, how are we going to solve that problem? And I think this is where the MassChallenge opportunity that was presented to us through Boeing and CASIS has a real place. And what we wanted to find out is, okay, if we went into an animal model, how would we be able to study this? And so there are animal models where you can actually make them osteoporotic, but it's very complicated, as this diagram shows. And one of the key things with these models is that even though you reduce the bone density and slow down the metabolic process, bones have quite dense bone. So even by reducing that, it's still as strong as healthy human bone. And so if you have a bone glue trying to glue something back together, you're really not stress testing it. And so that's where microgravity came in. And I remember after being admitted into MassChallenge, really where the excitement was after we got in is when we were presented with the opportunity by Boeing and CASIS to submit applications. And the challenge was, how do you identify a need on the space station to advance your commercialization? And so we thought, well, that's really interesting, because during their presentation they said astronauts lose 2% of their bone mass per month. And we thought, well, that's quite interesting. Maybe we could design an experiment up on the space station to actually show the effects of the regenerative capacity of bone cells when in the presence of our biomaterial. And that ultimately is what we did for our experiment. We sent up a cell culture. We designed a cell culture experiment where we had strips of our material. It was controlled. And we were able to lay down osteoblast cells. And osteoblast cells are the cells that actually generate bone. And we were able to show that, indeed, our biomaterial promoted their activity. And we had looked at different expression on the genes for bone markers. And we were showing elevated levels in space as compared to Earth. And this was a real wow factor for us and gave us real inspiration. And this now has translated our business into a real potential to go after this patient population. Now we can get in front of investors with a real evidence to say it's possible, and it's now leading us down that pathway. And so recently our results were published in the Upward magazine, and we've submitted them to Nature. And now that we're in the publication strategy, we can start to leverage those results as we move forward for investment dollars. Where we stand with our product right now is it's entering clinical trials. Our first application is in dental. Our adhesive will be used to bond dental implants directly into patients that have to get a tooth replaced. And that trial will start, but again, that's in healthy patients. Our next application is to look at broken bones in the elderly. And that's where the results from this experiment in osteoporosis has huge translational value. And our next step is we are waiting right now, we have submitted a second application as sort of another opportunity to go up to space. And in this next experiment, we're not going to do a cell culture experiment. We're actually going to be hopefully using the rodent model that was just presented in the last session, where we actually create a critical size defect and show that our material can promote bone growth. And the net sum of all of this is that it'll help accelerate our discussions with the FDA and also raise, hopefully, more investment dollars to move this product towards commercialization. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you all. Do I have a speaker back on? I was coughing. Sorry about my coughing. You know, just when you don't need to do that. That's all very exciting stuff. And you're 3 of 14 projects that are up there. So, Kate, that must be really exciting to you to see all these different, of so many things that you're working on, things that have gone to space. What's that like?
Absolutely. I think, you know, it is confirmatory that this is such an important partnership for the startups we work with. As a mission-driven organization, our top priority is to make sure that we are helping startups understand the various ways in which they can move their idea to impact, and knowing that there are 14 companies in the past, we have 20 this year that are under analysis, that this is an important partnership for them is really validating. We're very grateful to Boeing and the National Lab for letting us be a part of it.
Well, it's been great working with you, and we really appreciate the opportunity. Kevin, you know, these things are really interesting, but they're not going to be a Boeing product. They're going to go off and be their own companies and things. So I find it interesting that Boeing is so supportive of this. And to be honest, it's not like you get IP out of this or anything. So tell us a little bit about Boeing's plan.
Yeah, the initial interest came really from the desire to generate demand, right, and get users onto the International Space Station. And like I said, when I talked, there was kind of an unrepresented community, right, and that's the startup community. And through some introductions, right, we found that there was an interest there, right, and presented with the opportunity, right, that there's incredible work that can be done, right? So to kind of leverage off one of the purposes and national objectives of the International Space Station, that's to, right, drive benefit to life here on Earth, right? And a lot of the work that these companies and the others were doing aligned just with that objective, right? Our partnership with MassChallenge was very well aligned because, like them, right, they take no IP, right, and they're very promotive of the startup industry in that way, right? They take no equity position and no IP. So that alignment and like-mindedness was really to promote the use of space station in a very impactful way.
And it's been how many years again? You said it's been...
the chart since 2014 has been since we were involved, right?
Yeah, right. So that's really terrific. And I'm hoping there are other people in the audience who say they'd like to participate in that. So I'm just going to go back to you, Kate. The buy-in to participate in this, there's different levels, so it doesn't, though Boeing's been extremely generous. And we've got some funding that we put together with that, so that we've got kind of a 1-2 punch together. But it's easy enough for people who are companies who would want to also participate with this kind of talent to be able to do that. So can you give us a range? How much does it cost to come and join MassChallenge and support these kinds of things?
Sure. So we're very fortunate that we have, as a nonprofit, that we're funded by philanthropy and public dollars, but also a large part of our funding comes from corporate partners who see the benefit in being close to startups, in bringing their expertise to bear on the issues startups are facing. And so our corporate partnerships range from smaller, let's call it $25,000 a year, to very meaningful at the size and scale that we are engaged with Boeing, where they provide about $500,000 a year in equity-free prizes to our startups. So we have partnerships that range throughout. We look for partners that are aligned in mission, that bring real strategic benefit to our startups, and that are on an innovation journey themselves, and that we can help them in their own business objectives.
So I like that, because there's an opportunity to start at a modest level and maybe just get engaged. So that's really a nice opportunity. Paul, I'm going to ask you. I was lucky enough to have Serena our astronaut, speaking in the Future Users Workshop here. She had a beautiful video, and in this video was AngiX, and your things were floating around in space, which was really cool. What is it like to see your work in space?
Well, it's exciting, and you know, for NGX, it's even more exciting because our chief scientist is my wife, and we have a 4-year-old, and we were able to bring our 4-year-old to the launch and watch it. So it's you know, it's really fascinating. You know, it's a totally different environment, and even the biology is different. The equipment is different, you know, but it's a fascinating experience. It's, you know, for us, the decision to go there was primarily CEO-driven, not scientist-driven. It's, you know, driven by the attraction of free money and
free money's good, and
potential to, you know, make connections. You know, so as an entrepreneur, your biggest nightmare is you have all these people watching you. Investors always want you to, you know, hit the next milestone, you know, and so on. And, you know, the most important thing is to keep showing progress, you know, show that you're active, you're making things happen. And, you know, so this was, you know, kind of an opportunity to make something positive and interesting happen. You know, the money can be helpful, the science can be helpful, but also, you know, just marketing, you know, Serena making, you know, very popular Twitter videos about us. You know, all of these, you know, the connections that we build, and the US National Laboratory making introductions to investors, and MassChallenge, of course. So, you know, there's a lot of business advantages even apart from the science. And it's fun, you know, it's something, you know, we have the little mementos that came back from the space station, and, you know, we can talk about this for the rest of our lives.
That's really amazing. And you said that you've got, Brian, that you've got some opportunities because of the, look, you were on the news, that's cool, and but it's helping you to advance your business because of the proving ground that you've had. So, and by the way, you have another flight queued up. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just one time, it was neat, I learned something, but in fact, there's a follow-on that's going to advance you further. So can you talk about how that's been helpful? And, you know, is it easier because?
Well, I mean, we had several investors sort of tracking us, and that's always the case in the startup world. No one's just going to hand out money right away. Mm-hmm. And the opportunity to go on the space station just came at an incredible time. It pulled our team together in a way that's really important. When you're working really hard, you need to kind of have uplifting moments. And so that was really exciting to go down for the mission. But following that, we were able to close quite a bit of money and essentially tripled the amount of money we had raised up to that point following this mission. Was it correlation, causation? I don't know, but I can certainly say it got us in the door with discussions to help close in many situations. And we also had scientific results that added value. And what happened with that is we actually met a PI that came to us and got really excited and said, you know, this means this, we could do that. And that led to us saying, well, why don't we try to take our game to the next level and advance our science? So we put in a second application, which is now obviously in the late stages of the review. And I think it's very promising. So as we go back through, again, the fundraising, now we're about to go into the clinic. It's going to take several-fold more dollars to bring that product now through clinical trials, but we have additional applications in orthopedics. So these experiments on the space station, it's the marketing, it's the validity, it's bringing the team together. There's a whole range of benefits, and I think this could come at a pivotal time, again, to help, you know, launch us or really propel us to the next level.
And you mentioned clinical trials. What's interesting about your work here, and I have something of a life sciences background, it's actually, it's an arduous process. And FDA approvals take time, and Nicole, I know you're thinking about those kinds of approvals as well. You're going to have an interesting step too, in that it seems like the way it needs to be manufactured, not only did you learn things and then you bring them back to Earth, but in fact, in your case, you're going to continue to manufacture in space. So that's an incredible journey, and I know that you have another flight, but how are things going with FDA and the idea of having them, how receptive are they to the fact that you're going to make something, bring it back down, that becomes a product?
I mean, I think for us, the real value here, again, is in using microgravity to manufacture the implant and added the additional added stability. I mean, right now, you know, these are early discussions that we're really starting to have, you know, as we think about potentially manufacturing this in space. So I think these are, you know, we're at the early stages of a lot of those discussions, but I don't think, you know, this is something that's impossible. Here is an opportunity, you know, for us in our particular case, one of the things that we're targeting is a retinal implant that is also targeting an orphan indication. And so by targeting an orphan indication, it's a much smaller patient population. So, you know, this is a great opportunity and a great use case to use this technology for potential other technologies as well, because we, you know, some of the advantages of this protein, it's incredibly stable, so we don't have issues like late loading. You know, we can make a lot of implants at one time. We make them in larger sheets and they're resized. So there's a lot of advantages that we have here. And then working, you know, I think with the Space Tango team has really helped us get over a lot of the barriers in terms of manufacturing and working, you know, directly with the ISS to automate that process.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Kate, I found out yesterday that you're helping to host us. NASA and ISS National Lab do something called Destination Station. And you're even going to the extent of helping us host a Destination Station in Boston when we're there in September. And so I'm just going to use this as a shameless commercial, that if you're up in the Boston area and you'd like to connect with us at all, that's an opportunity to check us middle of September at Destination Station, because Kate's kind enough to also host us with our NASA and ISS National Lab Dog and Pony Show, where we're going to be able to meet some people. We might have you guys stop by and talk about your work. That'd be interesting. Do we have any questions from the audience yet? We do? Can you shoot me a question?
Okay, now I can.
Sure, hit me. There you go.
There's a lot of questions about some of the individual cases that are put up here, and you may have answered them, but I'm going to go ahead and give them to you, and you can filter them as you would. There were a couple of questions for Lambda Vision concerning really what are their next steps, and if there were any plans involving applying lessons learned from spaceflight to maybe modify the process on Earth to improve the quality of implants, or are you focusing purely on undertaking that production in orbit?
Sure, so I can talk a little bit about that. You know, we as I mentioned, we sent our experiment on the space station in December. It came back in January. You know, we had an opportunity to analyze the thin films. You know, there were a couple of really great things that we learned. You know, the very first thing that, you know, could have made this even a no-go decision, the protein itself is still functional after we send it to space. So we did not see a change in the pre and post flight. So that was really encouraging. The other thing that we did see is that we were getting coating on one side. So that was a really encouraging finding as well. And then we did have areas where we were getting some very homogeneous layering. I think in one of the films that you saw that I showed, you actually could see a little bit of bubbles. That's something that we're trying to improve upon on the next flight, reduction of these bubbles, looking at different coatings to adhere the thin film to you know, sort of the reservoir that we're putting it in. And so I think, you know, those are great lessons. We actually now have a proposal out that we're trying to look at optimization and parameterization of this process, so that, you know, hopefully we can have a subsequent flight and test all of those improvements. And a lot of that work right now that we're doing is groundwork, and running that, you know, we'll run fluids over the thin films and see if there's any improvements. From a Lambda Vision standpoint, and that's something that we're doing in collaboration with our implementation partner, but from a Lambda Vision standpoint, we're also looking at a lot of the quality control and the metrics to look at these changes and improvements. So, you know, one of the biggest questions, I think Kevin might have even asked it when we were presenting about this project, was how can you tell, like, what's the improvement in microgravity that makes it worthwhile to go and actually manufacture this on space? And so what we're doing as a company is looking at those quality control systems, whether it be through microscopy, spectroscopy, so that we can actually look and apply these to other applications as well.
All right, thank you. For Launchpad Medical, there's a question about, have you started working with the FDA, and if so, have you had discussions about using microgravity as part of the FDA approval path? That's kind of interesting.
We are working with the FDA. We've had several meetings with them in sort of staging our studies to make sure that we're doing the right studies, because they're very expensive to have to redo. And that's going quite well. And as I said, we're about to start a clinical trial. Now that we're going to go into look at the patient population with osteoporosis, it's a big question whether we have to do these really complicated animal models where you have to induce an osteoporotic state. Or is there an opportunity to sort of hedge it and say, you know, we'll do it in a healthy animal, but perhaps augment that with our animal research and the preclinical research that we're doing on the space station. And so that would be a fundamental shift for us, because that would allow us to sort of take the best of both worlds, where we have, you know, great research on the ground with animals, but then try to show innovative pathways with the FDA. And I think we have a pretty good opportunity here because the environment is so extreme. And so we might be setting a new standard, which would be exciting to sort of lead the front on that. It's too early to say if it'll work, but regardless of the FDA pathway, it's giving us a real good understanding if our material has an influence on the bone healing process in these patients. And again, that has a feedback loop on raising more investment money. So if we have to do these complicated animal models on Earth, at least we've got some evidence to draw on the funding to do that.
Super.
Okay. Question for Angie X. A couple of questions, I believe here. What parameters did you use to determine that endothelial cells in microgravity behave more like those in normal blood vessels? And can you share some preliminary results on the layer-by-layer deposition?
All right. So the primary criteria, the primary difference between normal endothelium and endothelium in a tumor or in cell culture on the ground is that the endothelial cells proliferate in the tumor and on the ground, but they don't in normal vessels. So in normal vessels, endothelial cells are very long-lived. They may go decades without dividing, and they maintain very tight connections to the neighboring cells. So it's they're often called quiescent. So their function is just to mediate between the blood and the tissue, and they just fulfill that, and they don't proliferate. Whereas in the tumor, which is growing, the endothelial cells need to proliferate. And in cell culture, endothelial cells, in order to immortalize them, they were also converted into proliferative cell types, and if they don't proliferate, then they die. So there's no non-proliferating cell culture model for endothelial cells. And in space, a previous study had cultured endothelial cells in space and reported that they didn't proliferate well. So that gave us the idea. But there was very little detailed biology. Gene expression data was lacking. We weren't even sure, would that replicate? Did we believe it? But it was potentially very interesting if true, and so we did replicate those results. I didn't quite catch the second part of the question.
We're asking if you could share some preliminary results on the layer-by-layer deposition experiment.
That might be me.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think I tried to address that in the last response, but basically we had a pretty successful flight. The protein itself is stable. We were able to get layering, and now what we're doing is trying to optimize those parameters. And so if you are interested, there is a poster downstairs in the exhibit hall that describes some of those experiments as well as some of the quality metrics that we've been using to look at improvements in the microgravity environment.
Thanks for that. That was my greatest fear, that the various cases would get intermixed in these questions, so I knew that was going to come to pass. For a couple of MassChallenge questions, and I'm going to go to the most general one here. Is anyone within MassChallenge working on a pathway to clinical trials to make it easier to take the research from station and work it right into FDA approval process?
We do actually have at least 2 startups this year that are working on the drug discovery process. So come find me and I'm happy to share more or make a connection.
And very specifically, is MassChallenge in Texas engaged in national laboratory competition?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. But they hosted us again. Destination Station was in Austin, and MassChallenge again hosted us there, and we had a good talk about it. And if there's anybody interested in working with us in Texas with MassChallenge, you can come find me.
And there's a great question here to put Boeing on the spot. They said, thanks, Boeing, for this great program. Do you have long-term plans when working with these companies?
You know, the space station is going to be around for a while, right? And you heard from a couple of these companies that based on the initial experience on the International Space Station, that there's follow-on work, right? They're leaning forward into furthering the journey with the program, with the National Lab, right? And we're proud to see that, right? I think, you know, the kernels that, you know, that were planted and they grow, right? I think the long term, what would satisfy us is seeing these products and these technologies come to market, right? And benefit everybody, right? In that regard. We continue to work with MassChallenge year over year, and I think we're going to continue that, right? It's been very rewarding for us, right? It's been very rewarding for the National Lab and the International Space Station program and our stakeholders to see, right, that just a small amount of money, right, placed in the right hands, right, can make a difference. So.
And Kevin, you had an idea that we were talking about yesterday as a little alumni gathering next time we're up at MassChallenge, because some of the teams are up in the Massachusetts area. I thought that was a great idea, so maybe a little alumni event.
Okay, there's a question here that I think any of the panelists could answer. Can you provide quantitative, sort of business relevant metrics? I think what they're looking at here, decreased cost, whatever, that was enabled by your company's ISS experiments. How did it benefit you business-wise?
Well, I'll say financially for us, we actually took a loss. We under budgeted, so we didn't quite appreciate how much labor would be involved in a space experiment. You know, so it wasn't quite as beneficial financially as it should have been if the CEO had done more research in advance. But you know, it was definitely a lot of fun. There's a lot of marketing value. You know, it still piques investors' interest. And anything that helps us, you know, share our story is valuable. And it's definitely fascinating science. You know, for us, it's kind of there would be research needed to figure out how to commercialize, you know, the results that we found. You know, so it's in our situation, you know, so we discovered the changes in these cells, but they're not exactly like the normal endothelial cells. It's definitely a novel model for biology, which may be relevant to pharmaceutical drug development. But we don't know exactly what, you know, situation the cells resemble. Do they resemble some kind of pathological state that also occurs in diseases that people experience on the ground. To what degree do they mimic normal vasculature? Do they mimic, some kind of pathological condition? That requires some research to figure out. So I think we opened an interesting lead, but we didn't, from a business perspective, we opened the opportunity for interesting research expenditures more than we opened up, a direct path to revenue or profits. So these two may be a little closer to.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I can just say it really helped enable us in the fundraising efforts. We're going to be spending a lot of money, like you and others. So we're looking at inflection points and making sure we hit our milestones. And so the data that we generated, again, brought some scientific validity. It helped our discussions. I think it was the kicker to kind of, it wasn't the central thing that we've been doing to move our business forward, but it was absolutely a kicker. And that is really helpful for us. And I think it could be another kicker in the future as we potentially do another experiment. So I think it has an impact down the road in revenue, but right now it's impossible to say the direct revenue impact. Funny little story though, we got to send our space patches up, and we get to design a space patch, which is a really neat sort of artifact that we all get to keep. And our first revenue that we raised as a company was a request from someone out of Canada that collects space patches. And they wanted them for us and offered us $100. So we sent them. So that's like
maybe you need more space patches
in our company. Yeah. That is our first
fundraiser. More mission patches.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would just add to, I can echo both what they're saying, but I think the value is in the partnership. While it may, there's money, there's acceleration, the value is in really expanding your expertise in your team, right? So as you're, starting a company, everybody's looking at who's the team doing this, who's leading this, who do you know that can help you drive this technology to people and get it to patients faster. And so I think, by leveraging, there's super talented people at Boeing, ISS, NASA, that have really come to the table and said, you know what, I may not be able to help you directly with this, but I can help you, whether it be on a technical question or make an introduction. I mean, I don't know how many of you realize this, but the ISS Labs has a whole arm to helping their startup companies and companies in general help find funding. And so that's been something that's been incredible that we've been able to leverage. Introductions to investors, introductions to key opinion leaders in the field. That I think is may not be a return in actual dollars. It's the in-kind support that really you can't necessarily measure, but is incredibly important.
Thanks for that, and I think that it also has there's a group of people that I know I get partnerships started, and then I have the support of our science team who's working with you on those things, our operations team. They know how to make your payload work, and of course you mentioned implementation partners, and they're just so valuable in this because they know how to do these things. They've been there, they've done that, and anyone who's new to space is saying, how will I make this dip method go differently? How will I package my cells? How will I do this? And the implementation partners and our operations team are really excellent in helping to put those things together. So I think that team approach, and it goes too with the accelerated approach of MassChallenge, wrapping some support around your groups is definitely what I think we're aiming to do. More questions, or should I ask questions?
There's a couple of more general questions that might be good, actually as kind of wrap-up type questions.
Sure.
And for MassChallenge, there's a general question here just about if you had any advice for things once they've been accepted into the program, some of the basic stumbling blocks or things somebody might be thinking about as they're beginning this process. And then I would add to that, any suggestions you have for people who are applying.
Sure, both great questions. So let me start with the application and then we'll go to the in-program. So MassChallenge, our basic criteria is we're looking for highest impact and highest potential ideas. That includes companies across all sectors. It includes for-profit and nonprofit. And so the most important advice that we give is to be able to tell a compelling story about why what you want to build will make a big difference in this world. And that may be transforming one sector, it may be addressing a critical health need, but that's the story that we want to be able to hear. And then why an organization like MassChallenge can help accelerate your growth. Once startups arrive on site, we have startups, I think of us providing, as I sort of alluded to, a number of different resources. That's curriculum, that's our community, it's cash, it's the experts. And so what we say to startups is, first and foremost, be really focused about what you want to get out of the program. You alone know where you are in your company's life cycle, and you have 4 months to extract all you can from the rich set of resources we provide. So work with us, identify mentors, work with your advisory boards to set clear goals for the program, and then stay laser focused on accessing those resources in the program. So that's the first and foremost. And the second would be to make, as a second layer, that to really make use of the expertise that we have in our network. A startup's greatest scarcity is their own time. And startups who sort of get the most out of our program realize that they can use our branding to elevate their own branding and go out and raise money. They recognize that their mentors can help them access new customers. So they really understand where they can leverage our partnership to accelerate their own growth.
That's great. Thanks for that.
That's great. And then the next question is maybe the last question we have here. And for those of you who've gone through this process then and obviously gotten your research up on station and succeeded from that regard, what message do you have for those who are going to be following behind you and starting out? Both as things maybe you hadn't thought of or lessons learned or whatever advice you'd give.
That was going to be my question, so that's a good question. What's the, having gone through this as a first-time flight person, what's the advice that all of you have?
Budget more.
Yeah, so so I've actually advised a few subsequent MassChallenge companies on, how to prepare, and I think, budgeting is one place where it could be improved, and I think actually Boeing and the National Laboratory might just tell people what a good budget is, and and size the experiment to it, because a lot of the applicants have, just don't have experience, and I think it's a rich opportunity. It's a fascinating place to do science. It's like it's like being a pioneer in the Wild West, and you may have to expect a few arrows in the back, but but you also you'll have stories to tell for a long time, and you'll learn a lot,
and you'll survive it though.
And you'll survive the arrows, and you'll meet some great people, and so it's it's definitely for more adventurous businesses, but it's but there's a lot of positive sides to it.
So roll with it. Go roll with the punches, or the arrows in the back, or whichever.
I mean, I think for me, what I would say is start the conversations early and keep the dialogue open. What I really realized through this entire process, and this is working with the ISS and Boeing on this prize, is that, I came in and I had some different ideas, and they were willing to kind of talk through what is practical and what is not. From starting that discussion early, we kind of molded our application and the science around, we had no idea how to go to space, right? And so we were so worried about how are we going to get this up there? Do we need the Raspberry Pis and all these totally technical things? And they said, let's not worry too much about that. You'll have a partner that you'll be able to work with that understands that. Let's focus on what's the real need for your science right now and how that can benefit people on Earth, and how you can really leverage that microgravity environment. And so that took a lot of the stress out of the initial, I can't apply for this because I don't know how to get to space. And so I found that really useful. So what I would say to people is don't be afraid to have those conversations, start the dialogue early, And you know, I found everybody to be really, really receptive and really want to help. And you know, for people who have ideas that are just not going to work, that's a good way to save your time too. Don't waste your time if it's a proposal that doesn't have a good fit for microgravity. Maybe it's better for NASA's mission, and they'll let you know that right away. So I think that would be my one bit of advice.
I would just say, I think the contingency planning was something that we learned. The actual launch can shift, and it does shift. And so since we were doing like a cell culture experiment, I think their process in the lead up was really good. You end up doing what's called an EVT, where you do an experimental validation test or plan. And that's great because you learn a lot of things from that before you fly. But what it doesn't do is kind of build in this contingency issue where if things get delayed for the actual launch date. For us, we were doing a cell culture experiment. We were actually seeding the cells a day or two before the launch. And so a day or two delay actually affected that. And so we had to have backup sort of experiments ready to go. And if it was greater than a day or two, we just slid in the backup, which was seeded in replacement, which was fine, but that took a lot more effort than we ever really anticipated. The other thing is there's limited access on the space station, so it's unbelievable access to be able to do this experiment. We learned a lot. We probably, we thinned ourselves out on one of the test parameters. We didn't have the statistical powering at the end of the day. It was designed to have power, but we didn't get enough sample to be able to make that statistical claim. That's the reality of the space experiment. So you just got to take that into account when you're planning your experiment.
Right, so the ones with live tissues and cultures are, of course, you're all in a complicated area with what you're doing compared to something that isn't something that needs to be alive when it goes up there. So that does truly complicate it, and launch windows do move. And I was warned about that when I started in December, when Christine says, hey, why don't we do something around the launch? And everybody says, because they never stay on that date, they keep moving. And now I know. So they slide up, and you've got to have backup. So that's an interesting point for the complicated kind of work that you're doing. Kevin, I'm going to throw that question, though, to you, because you've been in the business and you've been watching these projects. So any advice for the folks who are doing projects that, you know, things that you've seen from other past work?
I think the open-mindedness, the reception when we walk into MassChallenge every year and start talking about these companies and their objectives, right? The open-mindedness, right? They're in early formulation and they're just a sponge, right? And to get down to their needs, right? And we're tuned in to be listening to those things that space station and microgravity or the other environments in low Earth orbit can maybe enhance or solve. So we're always keyed in on this, and so whenever we hear something, you know, we just kind of rapidly, you know, grab onto that and have that conversation. So the advice is, you know, as Nicole had said, just be open to these things, follow the conversations, and ask a lot of questions, and don't be intimidated by the opportunity that's there at your doorstep.
And that's great advice, and I appreciate that. Are there any more questions before we wrap up?
No, ma'am.
All righty. Since there are no more questions, I just wanted to thank everybody and also for highlighting so many interesting parts of what it's like to do flight experiments. I think everybody in the audience is going to be looking forward to seeing what's coming next out of MassChallenge. I think they're going to be looking for things coming from your teams. So we'll all be watching for, you know, Lambda Vision, AngieX, and Launchpad Medical in the news and in publications. So we look forward to seeing more of that. And I think we do put some of those things on our webpage and our blog. So maybe what we need is a follow-up in a little bit with some upcoming flights is another blog from all of you so that we can hear how you're doing.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for joining me.